Hello everyone, and welcome back to our channel. Today, we're diving deep into the sands of time to uncover the story of one of history's most radical and enigmatic figures, the Pharaoh Akhenaten. Forget what you think you know about ancient Egypt, because this guy literally rewrote the rules. Our story begins around 1353 BC. Egypt is at the zenith of its power and wealth, a sprawling empire built on tradition and a complex pantheon of gods. The capital city, Thebes, is a bustling metropolis, dominated by the massive temple complex of Karnak, dedicated to the king of the gods, Amun-Ra. The priests of Amun-Ra were incredibly powerful, controlling vast amounts of land and wealth, their influence rivaling that of the pharaoh himself. Into this world of established power and ancient beliefs, a new pharaoh ascends to the throne. His birth name was Amenhotep IV, which means Amun is satisfied. A pretty standard name for a pharaoh, right? It pays homage to the most powerful god of the time. For the first few years of his reign, everything seemed normal. He married the legendary Nefertiti, whose beauty is still talked about today. He completed some building projects his father started and generally played the part of a traditional Egyptian king. But beneath the surface, something revolutionary was brewing. Slowly at first, then with breathtaking speed, Amenhotep IV began to introduce a new divine concept. He started focusing on a god called the Aten, which was represented not by a human or animal form, but by a simple solar disk. A sun disk whose rays ended in little hands often shone, extending the Ankh, the symbol of life, to the royal family. Initially, the Aten was presented as just another aspect of the sun god Ra, but soon, things took a dramatic turn. Around the 5th year of his reign, Amenhotep IV did the unthinkable. He changed his name from Amenhotep to Akhenaten, which means effective for the Aten, or he who is of service to the Aten. This wasn't just a name change. It was a declaration of war against the old religious order. By removing Amun from his name and replacing it with Aten, he was publicly rejecting the authority of the most powerful priesthood in the land. But he didn't stop there. Akhenaten declared that the Aten was not just the most important god. It was the only god. This was a seismic shift. Ancient Egyptian religion had always been polytheistic, with hundreds of gods and goddesses governing every aspect of life and death. Akhenaten was proposing a radical idea: monotheism. He ordered the temples of the old gods, especially those of Amun-Ra, to be closed. He sent workers across the land to chisel out the name of Amun and other deities from monuments and tombs. Imagine the shock and confusion this must have caused. For centuries, Egyptians had prayed to Osiris for passage into the afterlife, to Hathor for love, and to Thoth for wisdom. Now, their king was telling them those gods didn't exist. To make a complete break with the past, Akhenaten decided to abandon the traditional capital of Thebes. He founded a brand new city, right in the middle of the desert, on a site that had never been dedicated to any other god. He called it Akhenaten, meaning horizon of the Aten. Today, we know it as Amarna. This was to be the center of his new world, a holy city built from scratch, dedicated solely to the worship of the sun disk. He moved the entire royal court, the administration, and thousands of workers and artisans to this remote location. It was a monumental undertaking, designed to physically and spiritually separate his new regime from the old. Life in Amarna was centered entirely around the royal family, Akhenaten, Nefertiti, and their 6 daughters. They were presented as the sole intermediaries between the Aten and humanity. Only through them could people know and worship the one true God. This brings us to another revolutionary change: the art. The art from Akhenaten's reign, known as the Amarna style, is unlike anything that came before it. Traditional Egyptian art was rigid, formal, and idealized. Pharaohs were always depicted as young, powerful, and physically perfect. But under Akhenaten, this all changed. Art became shockingly naturalistic, almost caricature-like. Akhenaten himself was depicted with a long, thin face, a protruding jaw, a slender neck, a pear-shaped body with a potbelly, and wide hips. Scholars have debated for decades whether this was a true-to-life portrait, perhaps indicating a medical condition, or if it was a symbolic representation. Some theories suggest he was depicted as both male and female, representing the Aten as the sole creator, the father and mother of all life. The art also showed unprecedented scenes of intimacy and daily life within the royal family. We see Akhenaten and Nefertiti playing with their daughters, kissing in their chariot, and mourning the loss of a child. These were not the stiff, divine figures of old. They were a human family, albeit a very special one. This new style was all part of the propaganda. It emphasized the central role of the king and his family as the living conduits of the Aten's power. By showing them as the source of all life and love, it reinforced their unique connection to the divine. So, let's recap where we are. In just a few short years, Akhenaten has turned his entire country upside down. He's ditched 1,000 years of religious tradition, declared a single god, changed his name, closed the old temples, and built an entirely new capital city in the desert. He's also completely transformed the artistic style of the nation. It was one of the most radical social and religious experiments in all of human history. But as you can imagine, not everyone was happy about these changes. The disenfranchised priests of Amun were fuming. The general populace was likely confused and scared, their entire worldview shattered. And while Akhenaten was focused on his religious revolution at home, what was happening to the vast Egyptian empire abroad? Was his new world built on a solid foundation, or was it a house of cards, ready to collapse? Life in Akhenaten must have felt like living in a different world. The city was built with incredible speed. Unlike the dark, mysterious temples of Amun-Ra, Akhenaten's temples to the Aten were open-air courtyards, flooding worshippers with the very sunlight they revered. Art underwent a radical transformation. Gone were the idealized, eternally youthful figures of traditional Egyptian art. In their place, we see shockingly realistic, almost caricatured depictions of the royal family. Akhenaten is shown with an elongated skull, a slender neck, a potbelly, and wide hips. His wife, the beautiful Nefertiti, and their 6 daughters are depicted with similar features. Why this drastic change? Was Akhenaten suffering from a genetic disorder, like Marfan syndrome, as some have suggested? Or was this a deliberate artistic and theological statement? Many Egyptologists believe it's the latter. By portraying himself as androgynous, as both male and female, Akhenaten might have been styling himself as the sole intermediary of the Aten, the father and mother of all humankind. He was the only one who truly knew the god, and everyone else had to worship the Aten through him and his family. The famous sculptures and reliefs aren't just family portraits. They are religious icons, central to the new faith. Nefertiti wasn't just a passive queen. She was a co-ruler, depicted with a power and prominence unheard of for a pharaoh's wife. We see her smiting Egypt's enemies, a role traditionally reserved for the pharaoh alone. She was a high priestess of the Aten cult, and her name, which means the beautiful one has come, was known throughout the land. Together, Akhenaten and Nefertiti presented themselves as the divine couple on earth, the living conduits of the Aten's power. Their relationship and public displays of affection, often captured in intimate family scenes with their daughters, were a core part of the new state religion. While Akhenaten focused on his spiritual revolution, the vast Egyptian empire began to fray at the edges. Diplomatic letters found at Akhenaten, known as the Amarna letters, paint a desperate picture. Vassal kings in Syria and Palestine begged for Egyptian troops and gold to fend off invaders, particularly the rising power of the Hittites. But their pleas often went unanswered. The pharaoh seemed consumed by his new religion, neglecting the earthly duties of an emperor. The military, once the pride of Egypt, was sidelined, and its leaders grew resentful. At home, the economy suffered. The closure of the traditional temples meant thousands of priests, scribes, and artisans were out of work. The wealth that once flowed to Amun-Ra was now funneled exclusively into Akhenaten's new city. For the common person, life became harder, and many likely continued to worship the old gods in secret. Then, around year 12 of his reign, tragedy struck the royal family. One of his daughters, Akhenaten, died, and the grief is palpable in the art from her tomb. Soon after, things get very mysterious. The beautiful and powerful Nefertiti simply disappears from all official records. Did she die? Did she fall out of favor? Or did she, as some theories suggest, take on a new name and rule as a co-regent, perhaps even as the enigmatic Pharaoh Smenkhare who appears briefly at this time? We simply don't have the answers. What we do know is that Akhenaten's final years were likely lonely and filled with uncertainty. Akhenaten ruled for 17 years. After his death, the throne passed briefly to the mysterious Smenkhare, and then to a 9-year-old boy, Tutankhaten. You probably know him by a different name. With Akhenaten gone, the old order came roaring back. The powerful priests of Amun, the military generals, and the old nobility saw their chance. They wasted no time dismantling everything the heretic king had built. The young pharaoh was persuaded to abandon the Aten. He changed his name from Tutankhaten, living image of the Aten, to Tutankhamun, living image of Amun. The royal court abandoned Akhenaten and returned to Thebes. The new city in the desert was left to the sand and the wind, its name chiseled off monuments. The reaction against Akhenaten was brutal and systematic. His name and image were erased from temple walls and king lists. His statues were smashed, his temples torn down, their blocks were used as filler for other buildings. The goal was not just to forget him, but to erase him from existence entirely, the worst possible fate for an ancient Egyptian. For over 3,000 years, it almost worked. Akhenaten became a ghost, a forgotten chapter in Egypt's long history. It wasn't until the 19th century, when archaeologists rediscovered the ruins of Akhenaten, that the story began to be pieced back together. The discovery of Tutankhamun's tomb in 1922 provided even more clues, showing the transition back to the old ways. Today, Akhenaten is one of the most famous, or infamous, pharaohs of all. Was he a visionary genius, the world's first monotheist who was centuries ahead of his time? Or was he a fanatical tyrant who brought a golden empire to the brink of collapse for the sake of his personal obsession? Perhaps he was a bit of both. He was a revolutionary who dared to challenge the most powerful institutions of his day and imagine a different reality. His vision of a single, universal God was a radical idea that would echo through later religions. But his methods were autocratic, his reforms were disruptive, and his legacy was one of chaos that took generations to repair. His story is a powerful reminder of how a single individual's vision can change the world, but also of the powerful forces of tradition that resist that change. The sun god Aten may have set, but the shadow of his most devoted follower, Akhenaten, continues to fascinate and confound us to this day. Thank you so much for joining me on this journey back to ancient Egypt. If you enjoyed this two-part series, please hit that like button, and consider subscribing to the channel for more deep dives into history. Let me know in the comments what you think about Akhenaten. Visionary or heretic, I'd love to hear your thoughts. Until next time, stay curious.